Tonight, we descend into the dust of southern Mesopotamia, toward a plain where the rivers once breathed like living creatures. In the late 19th century, archaeologists working among the ruins of ancient cities began lifting small clay tablets from the ground. They were not golden treasures. They did not shine. They sat in the palm like dried pieces of earth, marked with tiny wedge-shaped signs. At first, they looked modest, almost dull. Yet scholars at the British Museum, the University of Pennsylvania, Yale, and Oxford would spend generations learning their language. Slowly, patiently, they realized these tablets carried voices from more than 5,000 years ago. They carried lists, prayers, myths, lawsuits, school lessons, hymns, jokes, warnings, and memories. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the night settles around you, write where you are watching from and what time it is there. Somewhere, across the darkened world, another listener may be entering the same ancient silence. You are standing now at the edge of Sumer, around 4000 BC. Though dates are always a little slippery in lands this old, the air is warm, almost heavy. It smells of river mud, reed smoke, damp clay, and animals sleeping close to human walls. The sky above you is enormous, washed in pale gold at dusk, with birds moving low across the marshes. There are no pyramids here, no marble temples, no imperial roads lined with stone soldiers. There is only water, silt, reeds, insects, cattle, and people shaping wet earth into the first fragile forms of city life. Yet from this softness comes something harder than stone. A memory system. A way to store the human voice outside the human body. That is the strange beginning. You might expect the first writings to be poetry, kingship, or sacred prophecy. That would be pleasingly dramatic, and humans do enjoy making themselves sound grand. But the earliest tablets are often more practical. Barley, sheep, jars of oil, workers, rations. Numbers pressed into clay because someone, somewhere, wanted proof. Records confirm that early writing in Mesopotamia grew from administration and accounting. Researchers at major universities have long described it as a solution to a very human problem. How do you remember what belongs to whom? When a settlement becomes too large for memory alone, how do you track grain when hands, mouths, temples, and fields multiply? So, the first mystery is not that Sumer invented writing. The deeper mystery is why it needed writing so early, and why its texts soon reached so far beyond simple counting. The tablets begin as receipts, but they do not remain receipts. Like a whisper learning to become a voice, they slowly open into stories of gods, kings, cities, floods, creation, and the strange purpose of humankind. For a moment, it feels as though you are kneeling beside an excavator at dawn. The trench is quiet. The workers have paused. A brush moves lightly over packed earth. There is a small shape emerging, baked by time and pressure. It is no larger than a modern phone, which is amusing in a slightly uncomfortable way. Both objects hold messages. Both survive by being touched. But this older device does not glow. It waits. A tablet is lifted. Its surface is cracked, but the marks remain. They are not letters as you know them. They look like bird tracks, nail marks, little cuts made with a reed stylus. Each sign has been pressed into damp clay by someone whose name may be gone forever. That person moved their hand, finished the record, and perhaps never imagined you. Yet here you are. The first mainstream fact to rest beside you is simple, but profound. Sumerian is the earliest known written language that can be read in substantial surviving texts. Egyptian writing appears very early too, and scholars continue to discuss exact timelines and influences. Still, the southern Mesopotamian tablets preserve an unmatched administrative and literary archive from the birth of cities. There is an open scholarly debate about how much of this system emerged locally, and how much developed through contact with nearby regions. Some researchers emphasize the dense temple economies of Uruk. Others point toward wider networks across Iran, Syria, and Anatolia. The ground refuses to give one easy answer. Naturally, the ground is rude like that. Then comes the quirky little tidbit, the kind that makes the ancient world feel uncomfortably close. Sumerian school tablets show students practicing signs again and again. sometimes badly. Teachers corrected them. Pupils copied lists. Some exercises suggest boredom, pressure, and the familiar dread of getting work wrong. 5,000 years pass, and still, homework survives. You may smile at that, softly, but even schoolwork becomes unsettling in Sumer because education belonged to a world of control. To write was not simply to express yourself. It was to enter the machinery of temple, palace, field, and storehouse. The scribe did not merely record civilization. He helped civilization remember, demand, measure, punish, and continue. In your ears, the echo changes into a low room filled with boys repeating signs. Reed pens scratch against clay. A teacher watches with tired eyes. Outside, goats shuffle past a wall. Somewhere beyond the school, canals divide the land into long, wet lines, and the city keeps account of everything it can name. This is where Sumer begins to feel as if it knew too much. Not because it held modern science in disguise. Not because every tablet hides a cosmic secret. The unsettling part is quieter. Sumer knew that power lives inside records. It knew that memory can be stored, organized, and used. It knew that a name written down can outlast the breath that spoke it. That realization changes everything. Long before recorded history becomes comfortable to us, there is already bureaucracy. There are already specialists, workers, overseers, priests, and rulers. There are already systems that turn human days into measured units of labor. You can almost feel the clay drying in the sun, sealing a person's task into permanence. And yet the tablets are not cold alone. They also preserve longing. They preserve fear of death, praise for the gods, grief for destroyed cities, and tenderness toward lost homes. The same civilization that counted sheep also asked why humans suffer. The same hands that recorded grain also imagined the underworld, divine judgment, and the fragile place of people beneath heaven. Perhaps that is why Sumer feels older than its age. It does not simply appear as a first chapter. It appears already complicated, already burdened, already haunted by questions that never quite leave us. Who owns the harvest? Who speaks for the gods? Why are cities built? Why do they fall? Why must people work beneath powers they cannot see? You walk through the settlement as evening deepens. The mud brick walls glow red, then brown, then nearly black. Smoke rises from cooking fires. Children disappear through narrow doorways. Dogs bark at shadows. The river slides past with its patient, oily sound, carrying silt from distant mountains toward the gulf. Above the roofs, a temple platform rises. It is not yet the massive stepped structure that later ages will build, but it already changes the horizon. It tells the eye where to look. It tells the body where power gathers. Even in darkness, its shape remains. Inside such places, clay tablets accumulate. They are stored, sorted, sealed, broken, discarded, and sometimes accidentally preserved by fire. That is another strange kindness of history. Disaster bakes memory hard. A burned archive may survive when a peaceful room melts back into mud. Destruction, in its careless way, becomes a librarian. The fragments do not give you a full story. They never do. Instead, they offer glimpses, like lamps seen across marsh water. A name, a ration, a hymn, a king, a goddess, a flood, a field boundary, a complaint, a list of professions, a proverb sharp enough to cross millennia. And between those fragments, your mind begins to build the hidden shape. Sumer was not only a civilization of firsts, it was a civilization that understood beginnings as dangerous. It remembered a time before cities, then built cities anyway. It imagined gods organizing the world, then organized its own world with almost sacred precision. It is possible that Sumer's greatest secret is not buried in one tablet. It may be scattered across thousands of them, in plain sight. The secret is the birth of a pattern. Human beings gather, measure, worship, obey, resist, record, and remember. Then the record begins to shape the people who made it. The clay does not sleep. As night falls over the ancient plain, you sense why these tablets still disturb the modern mind. They are too ordinary to dismiss, and too ancient to feel ordinary. They speak of beer, sheep, labor, gods, kings, and schoolboys. They speak of systems forming in the dark. They speak of a world that has vanished, yet somehow still touches your own. Because every receipt, every database, every official form, every stored message has a distant ancestor in this dust. The tablet beneath the brush is not merely an artifact. It is a mirror, small enough to hold, old enough to unsettle. And perhaps, as the stars appear over the rivers, you understand the first quiet truth. Sumer did not only write things down because it knew because it wrote things down. Your mind drifts toward the lowlands where two great rivers loosen their grip and spread into shining marsh. The ground is not firm in the way stone country is firm. It yields beneath the foot. It takes an imprint, drinks it, softens it, and almost seems to breathe it away. This is southern Mesopotamia in the deep 4th millennium BC, a world of water and heat. The air tastes faintly of salt, fish, smoke, and green reeds crushed under sandals. In the distance, cattle stand half sunk in the shallows. Their horns catch the early light like dark hooks against a pearl-colored sky. There are people here, but not yet in the way later cities will announce themselves. They do not arrive with banners and carved monuments. They gather along the river edges, where mud can become brick, reeds can become walls, and water can become a bargain with survival. Every hut is a small argument against the floodplain. The landscape is generous, but never gentle. It gives fish, birds, clay, bitumen, dates, and reeds. It also gives fever, insects, sudden water, and soil that must be watched like an unpredictable neighbor. The rivers feed the land, then threaten to erase it. You can almost hear the oldest lesson forming in the human mind. Nothing here is simply owned. Everything is negotiated. A mainstream historical fact rests quietly beneath this scene. Archaeologists identify the Ubaid period as a long cultural foundation in southern Mesopotamia, beginning many centuries before the great urban flowering of Uruk. Excavations at sites such as Eridu, Tel Al-Abyad, and nearby settlements reveal temples, painted pottery, houses, and early social organization. The old cities do not rise from emptiness. They grow from villages that have already learned patience. They grow from hands that know how to cut reeds, shape clay, build walls, drain fields, and return after water has misbehaved. Civilization does not begin with a throne. It begins with maintenance. That is less glamorous, naturally. Kings prefer not to mention drainage. You move closer to a settlement at the edge of the marsh. The houses are low, their walls built of mud brick, the roofs layered with reed matting. Smoke slips through openings, carrying the scent of baked fish and barley porridge. Somewhere, a child laughs, then coughs. Somewhere else, a woman scrapes a pot clean with practiced force. The village is not primitive in any simple sense. It is skilled, organized, and alert. People know the seasons by color and smell. They read the river by its level, the soil by its crust, the sky by its birds. Knowledge is not yet stored in long-written archives, but it lives in bodies, routines, and repeated work. You stand near a canal, narrow and muddy, cut by human hands. It reflects the pale sun in broken pieces. Men and women move along it with baskets, poles, and tired shoulders. This water is not wild anymore. Not completely. It has been persuaded into lines, guided toward fields, made to serve grain. Here, one of the great transformations of history quietly unfolds. Irrigation allows more food. More food allows more people. More people require coordination. Coordination invites authority. Authority, being authority, soon discovers it enjoys being taken seriously. Scholars still debate how quickly irrigation created hierarchy in southern Mesopotamia. Some emphasize environmental pressure, arguing that canals required managers and collective labor. Others warn against making the landscape too powerful in the story, because human choices, ritual traditions, trade, and household strategies also shaped the path toward cities. The debate remains open, and wisely so, for the land itself offers no single instruction. The marsh does not say, build a state. The river does not say, invent kings. People do that. Yet the environment presses on them with wet hands. It rewards cooperation, punishes neglect, and makes isolation difficult. If your upstream neighbor mishandles water, your field may suffer. If your canal silts up, your harvest shrinks. So people gather, not all at once, not in a grand cinematic surge. Slowly, they become more dependent on one another. They repair banks, they clear channels, they share tools, they quarrel over plots, they make offerings to powers they hope are listening. A village becomes a node in a wider web, and the web tightens. For a moment, it feels as though you are standing inside a reed house at night. The walls whisper when the wind touches them. A lamp burns with a small, wavering flame. The floor is packed earth, cool beneath bare feet. Outside, frogs pulse in the marsh, steady as a second heartbeat. A family sleeps close together. They have clay bowls, woven mats, baskets of grain, perhaps a figurine tucked near a wall. Their world is small enough to walk across, yet already connected to distant places. Obsidian, stone, metals, shells, and other materials travel into Mesopotamia from regions far beyond the marshes. That is another important point. Sumer's homeland is rich in clay and reeds, but poor in timber, hard stone, and metal. To build complexity here, people must reach outward. They must trade, bargain, travel, and imagine the value of things not born from their own soil. A civilization of mud becomes hungry for mountains. There's a quirky tidbit hidden in that hunger. The people of early southern Mesopotamia used bitumen, a natural tar, for waterproofing baskets, boats, and building materials. It was sticky, dark, useful, and probably extremely annoying to handle. Even the ancient world had its version of getting something dreadful on your fingers. Along the waterways, boats made of reeds and coated with bitumen glide between settlements. They carry grain, pottery, fish, people, and news. Their movement is quiet, but it alters the scale of imagination. The world becomes larger than the village. A person can leave at dawn, follow water through reeds, and return with objects whose origins feel almost mythical. You watch such a boat pass at sunset. Its hull leaves a thin wake, stirring floating plants. A man at the stern pushes with a pole. His silhouette bends and straightens, bends and straightens. Behind him, the marsh opens into copper light, and birds rise in a sudden cloud. The first sacred centers begin to matter more deeply. At Eridu, later tradition remembers extraordinary antiquity, treating the city as a place where kingship descended from heaven. Archaeology shows long sequences of temple rebuilding there, with structures raised and remade over generations. Each rebuilding is a statement. The place matters. The past under it matters. The god, or the idea of the god, remains. This is how sacred architecture changes time. A house shelters a family. A temple shelters memory. When a community rebuilds on the same holy spot, layer upon layer, it teaches the ground to become ancestral. People are not only living beside mud and water, they are living beside accumulated meaning. The temple is not yet the towering monument of later imagination. It may seem modest from far away, a raised building of packed earth and brick, but it gathers attention. It receives offerings. It organizes movement. It becomes the place where anxiety travels when crops fail, when floods rise, when children sicken, when the sky refuses rain. Perhaps the first cities begin with that shared anxiety. Perhaps they begin when practical labor and sacred fear find the same address. You bring grain to the storehouse. You bring prayer to the shrine. You bring your worry to the people who claim they know what the divine world wants. It is possible that this is the hidden root of Sumer's later brilliance. Not sudden genius, not a magical spark, a long training in dependence. Dependence on water, clay, reeds, trade, ritual, neighbors, and memory. Every canal is a lesson in cooperation. Every temple platform is a lesson in obedience. Every boat route is a lesson in distance. The marsh darkens now. Heat drains slowly from the air. Mosquitoes hum near the skin. The smell of wet soil grows stronger as night rises from the ground. In the settlement, small lamps appear one by one, like cautious stars brought down to earth. You sense the human world tightening into form. Huts become neighborhoods. Paths become routes. Ritual becomes institution. Storage becomes authority. Labor becomes expected. The future city is not visible yet, but its bones are forming beneath the quiet. And in this dim, damp beginning, Sumer already carries its contradiction. It is fragile because everything depends on water. It is powerful because everything depends on people working together. It is ancient because the land has been waiting. It is new because humans have begun persuading the land to remember their shape. For a moment, it feels as though the marshland pulls back and reveals something larger. The paths grow harder underfoot. The reed houses stand closer together. The smells thicken into a crowded mixture of sweat, smoke, wool, grain dust, fish oil, and damp brick warming beneath the sun. You are entering Uruk, one of the first great cities on earth. It does not greet you with silence. It murmurs. It clatters. It breathes through thousands of bodies moving within walls, courtyards, workshops, shrines, and packed lanes. Donkeys complain in the heat. Potters turn wet clay with steady hands. Bakers pull dark loaves from ovens. Traders argue beside baskets of dates and jars sealed with clay. The scale is unsettling because it feels almost too early. Around the late 4th millennium BC, Uruk expanded into an urban center of extraordinary size for its age. Archaeologists from institutions such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania have long treated it as a crucial laboratory for early city life, administration, craft specialization, and writing. A city is not merely a large village. That sounds obvious, but the difference matters. A village remembers through faces, kinship, habit, and reputation. A city cannot depend on everyone knowing everyone else. A city must invent ways to make strangers cooperate. It must turn noise into order. Uruk attempts this with astonishing ambition. You walk through a narrow street where mud brick walls lean inward, holding the day's heat. The ground is stamped with footprints, hoof marks, and spilled grain. A boy carries a basket almost too large for him. A woman balances a jar against her hip. A man with a shaved head passes quickly, clutching a lump of sealed clay. That sealed clay matters. Before writing becomes fully visible, people use tokens, bully, and seal impressions to manage goods. Small clay objects stand for sheep, grain, oil, or labor. Seals leave images pressed into clay like ancient signatures. A container can be closed, marked, and trusted, at least in theory. Humans invent paperwork, then spend the next 5,000 years pretending it is temporary. The quirky tidbit is almost charming. Some early accounting systems used little clay tokens placed inside hollow clay envelopes. To know what was inside, marks were pressed on the outside. Eventually, the outside marks became more important than the hidden tokens. The receipt learned to replace the thing it recorded. That shift is quiet, but enormous. Once a mark can stand for an object, the world changes. A sheep can be absent, yet still counted. Grain can sit in one storehouse, while its record travels elsewhere. Labor can be promised, measured, owed, and remembered. Reality gains a shadow made of signs. In your ears, the city becomes a soft storm of transactions. Reed styluses press into damp tablets. Cylindrical seals roll across clay, leaving tiny processions of figures, animals, and symbols. Storage rooms fill with jars. Overseers check deliveries. Workers receive rations. Someone complains that the amount is wrong. Naturally, civilization has arrived. This is the city that writes memory. The earliest writing from Uruk, often called proto-cuneiform, is not yet a smooth literary language. It is a system of signs tied to administration, numbers, commodities, professions, and institutional needs. Scholars continue to debate how directly these signs represent spoken language at the beginning. Some see a practical recording system gradually becoming writing. Others stress that it already reflects complex thought, categories, and social control. The debate remains open and beautifully inconvenient. Was writing born as speech made visible, or as accounting made powerful? Did it begin as a tool for memory, or as a tool for authority? Perhaps in Uruk, those questions are not separate at all. You pass into a precinct where the ordinary city seems to lift its head toward heaven. Great temple platforms dominate the sacred districts. Walls are decorated with cone mosaics, their colored ends pressed into plaster in geometric patterns. The effect is both simple and hypnotic, like frozen woven cloth spread across architecture. Here, the city becomes theater. People bring offerings. Officials move with purpose. Priests and administrators occupy spaces that smell of incense, wool, oil, and stored grain. Sacred and practical life are not cleanly divided. The god receives, the temple stores, the worker labors, The scribe records. The system breathes through all of them. A mainstream historical fact settles into place here. Uruk's monumental architecture, including major sacred complexes, shows that large labor forces could be organized for construction projects. These buildings required planning, materials, skilled workers, and authority capable of gathering many hands around a shared command. The city teaches people to move together, not always willingly, of course. That is the uncomfortable part. A city gathers opportunity, but it also gathers obligation. It feeds imagination, but it measures bodies. It produces wealth, but also distance between those who command and those who carry. You feel this difference in the streets? Though no one needs to explain it. The laborer's back bends under brick molds. The craft worker repeats a practiced motion until clay remembers the shape. The administrator sees numbers where another person sees sore hands. The scribe sits between them, transforming human effort into lines on a tablet. There is power in that seated figure, not royal power. Exactly. Not divine power either. Something quieter. The power to define what happened. The power to say how much grain entered, how many workers appeared, how many jars were owed, how many animals belonged to a household or temple. The scribe does not need a sword to alter reality. A stylus is sharp enough. Your mind drifts into a tablet room at evening. The light is orange and low. A reed mat covers part of the floor. Clay tablets lie in rows, some wet, some drying, some already hardening into memory. The air smells of mud, warm skin, and oil smoke. Outside, the city continues its restless murmur. A young apprentice copies signs under supervision. His hand hesitates. A senior scribe corrects the angle of a wedge. The lesson is precise, almost severe. Writing is not decoration. Writing is discipline. A careless mark can miscount a flock, confuse a ration, or irritate a superior, which is never wise in any century. There is gentle sarcasm hidden in the scene. Humanity invents writing, and almost immediately invents administrators to be disappointed by it. Yet, the result is magnificent. From such rooms emerges a new relationship with time. Spoken orders vanish unless remembered. Written orders remain. A transaction can outlive the moment. A name can be carried beyond the face. A city can become aware of itself, not through one mind, but through thousands of stored marks. This is why Uruk feels like more than a place. It feels like a mechanism becoming conscious. The city counts its grain, but also counts its workers. It counts animals, jars, fields, offices, and offerings. It arranges people into categories. It identifies professions. It divides tasks. It produces a social map written not on parchment, but on clay pulled from the same ground beneath everyone's feet. Perhaps that is the hidden transformation. Mud becomes brick, and brick becomes walls. Mud becomes tablet, and tablet becomes memory. In both cases, the earth is shaped into structure. One structure holds bodies, the other holds knowledge. You step out beneath the wide sky. The sun lowers behind roofs and temple platforms. Dust hangs in the air, glowing softly. A line of workers moves toward a ration point. A priest disappears through a doorway. A scribe lifts a tablet and turns it toward the fading light, checking whether the signs are clear. Nothing about this moment feels simple. Uruk is creative and controlling, sacred and practical, brilliant and exhausting. It gives people new roles, new protections, new burdens, and new ways to be forgotten inside systems too large to see. Still, the city endures in the mind because it crosses a threshold. Here, memory stops being only a human act. It becomes an institution. It becomes architecture. It becomes clay. And somewhere inside that crowded ancient noise, the first city begins to understand a dangerous secret. Whoever records the world may also begin to rule it in your ears. The crowded city sound lowers into something older and stranger. A room appears, dim with lamp smoke, where a scribe bends over clay and copies names that already feel ancient to him. The tablet is not a simple list of men. It is a staircase of memory, descending into a time where kings become almost impossible to imagine. The surface is marked with rulers, cities, reigns, and a repeated rhythm of authority passing from one place to another. Kingship arrives, kingship moves, a city rises, a city loses favor, another city receives the sacred burden. The pattern feels calm at first, almost official. like a record keeper doing his work with admirable seriousness. Then the numbers begin to misbehave. Some rulers are said to reign for tens of thousands of years. Others sit on thrones for lengths of time that would make even the most ambitious politician blush. The tablet does not seem embarrassed. It simply states these reigns with the confidence of clay, as if eternity were a normal administrative category. This is the Sumerian king list, preserved in several versions from later Mesopotamian tradition. Major museums and university collections hold copies and fragments, and scholars have studied them for generations. It names dynasties before and after a great flood, joining political memory with mythic time in a way that refuses to stay neat. The mainstream fact is clear enough. The king list is not a modern history book, and it was never meant to behave like one. It combines real cities, remembered rulers, ideological claims, and legendary material. Some later kings named in the tradition are known from other evidence, while earlier figures belong to a more shadowed realm. That shadow is where the unease begins. You can picture the scribe copying the sequence with care. His reed stylus presses each sign into the clay. The lamp beside him smells of oil and faint soot. Outside, a door creaks in the night wind. Inside, the past is being arranged into order, one name after another, as if confusion itself can be disciplined. The list says kingship was lowered from heaven. That idea matters. Authority is not presented as a human invention, debated in some dusty council by tired elders. It is imagined as a power that descends. It enters a city. It rests there, glows there, commands there, and then moves elsewhere when destiny changes its mind. Rather rude of destiny, naturally, yet this movement gives the list its strange pulse. Eridu, Bad Tabira, Larak, Sippar, Shuruppak. These names appear like lamps across a dark plain. Each city carries kingship for a while. Each city becomes, for a moment, the center of the ordered world. Then the pattern shifts, and the sacred burden moves on. There is an open scholarly debate over what purpose the king list served. Some researchers see it as political theology, designed to justify later rulers by linking them to a single chain of legitimate kingship. Others read it as a memory project, preserving older traditions while reshaping them into a unified past. The tablet may be both propaganda and remembrance. Such things often share a room. Your mind drifts toward the first kings named before the flood. They are not ordinary rulers with manageable lives. Their reigns stretch across spans that feel cosmic. One rules for 28,800 years. Another for 36,000 years. The numbers are too vast for biography. They belong to myth, mathematics, ritual, or symbolism. A quirky tidbit sits quietly here. The enormous reign lengths are often written in units connected to Sumerian numerical systems, including large base 60 calculations. So the absurdly long kingships may not be random fantasy. They may carry numerical meaning, pattern, or inherited sacred structure. Ancient exaggeration, it seems, could be quite organized. That makes the list more interesting, not less. A simple lie collapses when questioned. A symbolic system keeps producing questions. Why these numbers? Why this sequence? Why divide the world into before and after the flood? Why insist that kingship came from above, when every ruler still needed earthly labor, food, guards, scribes, and taxes? You feel the room grow quieter. On the tablet, the flood cuts the world in two. Before it, reigns are immense. After it, kingship descends again. But time has changed. Rulers still matter. Cities still compete, and names still carry power. Yet the scale begins to shrink toward something more human. Not fully ordinary, perhaps, but closer to the limits of bone and breath. This structure is not only a story about kings, it is a story about time becoming damaged. The world before the flood seems wider, stranger, and less measured. The world after the flood feels reduced, inherited, and anxious. Something was lost. Something had to begin again. You walk, in imagination, through Shuruppak, remembered in Mesopotamian flood traditions. The streets are narrow. The walls are mud brick. The smell of river water rises after sunset. Somewhere, grain is stored. Somewhere, a family closes a door. Somewhere, an old man tells a child that the world has not always been as it is now. Stories like this do not preserve the past as a clear window. They preserve it like water preserves a reflection. Movement distorts everything, but the shape remains suggestive. There may be memories of real floods behind the tradition. There may be cultural trauma, ritual imagination, or political design. There may be all these things at once. Scholars from institutions such as Oxford and the University of Chicago have long treated Mesopotamian king traditions as layered compositions. They are not worthless because they contain myth. They are valuable because myth shows what a society wanted history to mean. The question is not only what happened, the question is why they remembered it this way. Perhaps the impossible rains are not meant to fool you. Perhaps they ask you to feel distance. They say that the earliest age is unreachable, not because nobody cared, but because it belongs to another order of reality. Human memory, when stretched too far, becomes ceremonial. The scribe knows this, perhaps, or perhaps he does not. He copies what tradition gives him. His task is not to solve the ancient world for your convenience. His task is to keep the chain from breaking. Name follows name. City follows city. Kingship moves through time like a flame guarded from wind. The tablet becomes a kind of map, but not of land. It maps legitimacy. It maps sacred transfer. It maps the belief that power has a pattern older than any living ruler. A king is not merely strong because he commands men. He is strong because he stands inside a story that began before him. That is why such lists can be dangerous. They do not only remember authority, they manufacture it. A ruler placed inside the chain becomes more than a local strongman. He becomes the latest receiver of something heavenly, ancient, and supposedly inevitable. Very convenient for him. You can almost hear the quiet sarcasm of history here. First, kings claim heaven favored them. Then scribes write it down. Then later generations call it tradition. The system becomes smoother with every copy. And yet, something tender remains inside the grandeur. The king list is also an attempt to resist oblivion. It gathers names against darkness, even exaggerated names, even impossible names. To be written is to remain slightly alive, like an ember under ash. The night deepens around the tablet room. The scribe finishes a line and pauses. His fingers are stained with clay. His shoulders ache. He has copied rulers who supposedly lived longer than mountains remember, yet his own body is tired from one evening's work. The contrast is almost human enough to hurt. Outside, the city sleeps under a field of stars. The same stars looked down on canals, temples, boats, and fields. They also look down on this effort to arrange time into a sequence. Above, heaven appears steady. Below, cities rise, fall, and argue over who received kingship first. It is possible that the king list hides no single secret. Instead, it reveals a habit of mind. Sumer and its heirs believed that history had structure, that catastrophe could divide ages, and that power moved according to patterns deeper than ordinary politics. Whether those patterns were divine, invented, or half-remembered, remains unsettled. The tablet does not answer. It simply waits, carrying names from a time that is no longer remembered in any simple way. Kings before the flood remain vast, remote, and uncomfortably calm. Their reigns stretch beyond belief, yet their cities sit in the dust like real places touched by real hands. And as the lamp burns lower, you sense the old question breathing beneath the clay. Did Sumer remember impossible kings because it misunderstood the past, or because it understood that the deepest past must always look impossible to those who come later? The air changes around you, as if the city itself has stepped aside to reveal the powers it fears. The temple platform stands in the pale morning, its bricks rough beneath the rising light. At its base, people move quietly with baskets, jars, animals, and offerings. Their footsteps sound careful, almost rehearsed. Above them, the shrine seems to watch. This is not a world where gods drift gently in distant clouds, smiling at human confusion. The divine beings of Sumer are close, demanding, organized, and deeply involved in the structure of life. They command cities. They receive food. They own fields. They send floods, fertility, kingship, illness, protection, and terror. You feel their presence in every official doorway. A mainstream historical fact settles into the scene. Sumerian cities each honored major patron deities, and temple households became central institutions in their economic and ritual life. In cities such as Uruk, Nippur, Eridu, and Lagash. Gods were not merely worshipped as private beliefs. They were treated as great household owners, with land, servants, offerings, and administrators. This makes the ancient city feel strangely theatrical. Everyone is acting within a sacred estate. The god is the invisible master. The priesthood tends the divine house. Workers provide food and goods. Scribes record the flow of offerings. Rulers claim favor, protection, or appointment from forces no ordinary person can safely contradict. Convenient, yes, also terrifying. You stand near a courtyard where animals shuffle in the dust. The smell is thick with wool, dung, incense, and grain beer. A priest lifts a vessel. A servant carries bread. A scribe watches the delivery, not because the god might forget, but because the institution must not. Even divinity appears to require paperwork. The Sumerian gods often seem less like abstract ideals and more like powerful members of a cosmic administration. Anu rules the high heavens, Enlil commands authority, storm, and destiny. Enki is associated with wisdom, water, craft, and cunning. Inanna carries love, conflict, kingship, and dangerous transformation. Each power has a domain, a personality, and a troubling capacity to interfere. They are not always comforting. That is part of their force. These gods are immense, but they are also restless, proud, hungry, clever, emotional, and political. They gather in assemblies, they issue decrees, they quarrel, they decide fates, they behave, in some stories, almost like a council of cosmic officials, except with storms and plague available during meetings. A dreadful improvement on bureaucracy. Perhaps here the fringe tidbit appears, small but persistent. Some modern fringe writers have imagined Sumerian gods as ancient visitors from the sky, turning divine councils into misunderstood technology. Mainstream scholars do not accept that reading because the texts belong to myth, ritual, and ancient theology. Still, the idea survives because Sumer's gods often behave as planners, engineers, and rulers of a system. The fascination is understandable. These beings measure land, assign roles, establish cities, organize crafts, and set boundaries. They do not simply create and vanish. They administer existence. They resemble the architects of order, standing behind the visible world like managers behind a curtain. But to ancient Sumerians, that was not science fiction. It was sacred reality. Your mind drifts into the temple storerooms. The air is cooler there, and the smell changes to barley, wool, oil, dried reeds, and sealed clay. Rows of containers sit in shadow. Each one is part of a divine household. Each one represents labor transformed into offering. The god does not eat like a person in the street, but the god must be fed. This is where belief becomes material. The relationship between people and gods is not only prayer. It is grain measured, animals selected, textiles woven, beer brewed, incense burned, fields worked, and doors guarded. Worship is a system of maintenance. The divine world must be served so the human world can continue. Nobody wants to discover what happens when the service fails. There is an open, scholarly debate about how far temple institutions controlled early Sumerian life. Some researchers emphasize the temple as the central engine of economy, craft, labor, and authority. Others argue that households, local elites, kin groups, and emerging palaces also played powerful roles. The picture is not a pyramid with one neat point. It is a web of competing forces. Still, the temple remains the most visible symbol. It rises above the plain as an answer to anxiety. Floods come, crops fail, children die, enemies approach, storms break the sky. The temple says that order can be negotiated if the right offerings are made, the right hymns sung, and the right people placed between humanity and the unseen. You hear a hymn in the distance. The melody is low, almost wavering. The words praise a deity with titles that stack like bricks. Great Lord, Radiant Queen, Shepherd of the Lands, Mistress of Battle, Keeper of Decrees. The repetition does something to the body. It slows thought. It teaches reverence through rhythm. The gods are given grandeur through language. They're dressed in epithets, wrapped in sound, surrounded by lists of powers. A deity's name is not just a label. It is a doorway. Speak it carefully, and you stand near force. Speak it wrongly, and perhaps you step where the floor is thin. That is the mood of Sumerian religion. The world is ordered, but not safe. The divine powers maintain reality, But they are not gentle parents. They can protect a city, then abandon it. They can grant kingship, then remove it. They can send prosperity, then let enemies into the gates. In this system, humans do not stand at the center. That may be the most unsettling truth. The city does not exist merely for human happiness. It exists within a cosmic economy where gods receive service and distribute order. People are necessary, but not supreme. They are useful, fragile, and replaceable. You feel this in the temple court. A laborer lowers his basket and rubs his shoulder. He may never enter the inner shrine. He may never see the sacred image except during festival processions. Yet his work supports the god's house. His body is part of the divine arrangement, whether he understands the full pattern or not. Perhaps no one understands it fully. Even the priests may be interpreters rather than masters. They read signs in animal bodies, smoke, dreams, stars, and unusual events. They consult rituals. They preserve procedures. They try to hear intention inside disorder. When the river rises strangely, when a child is born with an unusual mark, when the moon darkens, the world becomes a message. A message from whom? Exactly is the difficult question. The Sumerian term for divine decrees suggests powers, offices, patterns, and essential rules that structure civilization and nature. These decrees can be held, transferred, guarded, or stolen in mythic stories. They include kingship, truth, craft, music, writing, weapons, and the arts of civilized life. The world is imagined as an arranged set of functions. This is where the gods who measured the earth become most haunting. They do not only rule places, they define categories. They establish what things are. They make the city possible by giving it order. But the order is never free. It demands hierarchy, work, obedience, and ritual attention. The sun climbs higher. Heat gathers against the temple walls. A fly circles the rim of a beer jar. The priest's robe moves softly in the breeze. Somewhere, a seal rolls over clay, leaving behind tiny figures that march forever across a surface smaller than your hand. You realize that Sumer's divine world is not separate from its administrative world. They mirror one another. Councils above, councils below, storehouses above in imagination, storehouses below in brick, decrees from heaven, tablets on earth. The system repeats itself at different scales, as if civilization has copied the gods, or the gods have been imagined from civilization. Perhaps both are true. That is where the mystery deepens, without needing to shout. Sumer may not have known too much in the modern sense. It may have known something older and more disturbing. It knew that order requires stories powerful enough to make people obey. It knew that labor becomes easier to demand when it is woven into heaven. It knew that a city needs walls, grain, and gods. The shrine remains still above you. Its doorway is dark. No answer comes from within. Only the scent of oil, dust, and offerings. Yet the people keep climbing the platform. They keep bringing bread, wool, animals, and song. They keep feeding the invisible structure that gives their world meaning. And perhaps, in the quiet between him and record, you understand why these gods endure. They're not only characters in old myths. They're the shape of authority remembered as divine. They are the fear that the world must be maintained, or it may fall apart. The sound of the temple fades into a softer, heavier rhythm. You hear the scrape of hose in damp soil, the shuffle of bare feet, the breath of oxen, and the slow complaint of wooden tools. Dawn has not fully opened yet, but the fields are already awake. Mist hangs low over the canals. It clings to the reeds in silver water. A worker bends at the edge of a barley field, his hands dark with mud. Another lifts a basket of silt from a channel that has begun to clog. The day begins with labor because the land demands it, and the gods demand it too. In the old Sumerian imagination, humanity is not created to wander freely through a garden of leisure. That would be pleasant, of course, and suspiciously unlike most human experience. Instead, people appear within stories of divine need, burden, and service. The gods require workers. The world requires maintenance. Human beings enter as the answer to exhaustion. A mainstream historical fact sits beneath this idea. Mesopotamian creation traditions, preserved in Sumerian and later Akkadian texts, often describe humans as beings made to relieve the gods of labor. Scholars at major institutions such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago study these myths as reflections of temple society, work obligation, and sacred hierarchy. The story is unsettling because it does not flatter you. Many later cultures imagine humans as beloved children, chosen companions, or rulers of the earth. Sumer's older vision is more practical, and perhaps more honest in its severity. Humans are made to carry baskets, dig canals, raise grain, prepare offerings, and keep the divine household running. Creation has a job description. You stand beside the canal as men clear reeds from the waterway. The mud sucks at their ankles. The smell is sharp and organic, mixed with sweat, fish, trampled plants, and the faint sourness of standing water. A foreman watches from a higher bank, somewhere nearby. A scribe may be noting who appears for duty. Work is never merely physical here. It is counted. The field is divided. The workers are organized. The harvest will be measured. Some grain will feed households. Some will enter storage. Some will go toward temple offerings, rations, and obligations. A life can be translated into days, baskets, measures, and debts. That is not a modern invention. The ancient world arrived there with impressive speed. A quirky tidbit rises from the clay records. Ration lists show payments in barley, beer, oil, wool, and other goods, which means wages were often edible, drinkable, or wearable. In other words, your paycheck might arrive as beer. This sounds cheerful until you remember it also means someone else controls the tap. There is a quiet irony in that arrangement. The worker receives sustenance from the system that claims his labor. The temple and palace do not merely command bodies. They feed them, classify them, and make dependence feel like order. In Sumer, survival and obligation are woven tightly together, like reeds in a mat. Your mind drifts into a courtyard where laborers receive rations. A jar is opened. Grain is poured. The sound is dry and steady, like rain made from seeds. A woman steps forward with a child pressed against her side. Her hands are cracked. Her face is unreadable. The measure is checked, recorded, and passed along. This is humanity's role, not in one myth alone, but in the structure of daily life. To serve the gods means to serve the institutions that speak for them. To maintain creation means to maintain canals, fields, walls, storehouses, shrines, and accounts. The sacred and the exhausting are not separated. A temple hymn may rise in beauty above the city, but below it someone is hauling clay. That contrast is where the old stories breathe. The gods fashion humans so divine beings may rest, yet human rest remains limited. The gods receive offerings, yet humans produce them. The gods establish order, yet humans suffer the weight of that order. The system explains life, but it does not necessarily comfort the person bent over the field. There's an open, scholarly debate about how directly myths of human creation reflect real social conditions. Some historians read them as theological explanations for labor and hierarchy. Others caution that myth is not a simple mirror of society, but a symbolic language with ritual, poetic, and political layers. The clay tablets offer clues, not obedient answers. Still, the connection is difficult to ignore. A civilization built around irrigation, storage, temple service, and labor control produces myths in which work itself is cosmic. The canal is not just engineering. The bread loaf is not just food. The offering table is not just a table. Every task participates in a universe arranged by higher powers. You hear the creak of a wooden yoke. An animal exhales through wet nostrils. The worker beside it murmurs softly. Not to you. Not exactly to the animal either, but to the day itself. The sun rises higher, turning the water bright. Sweat begins to mark the backs of tunics. Perhaps this is why Sumer's creation stories feel so old. They do not begin with abstract philosophy. They begin with fatigue. Even the gods grow tired. Even heaven knows the burden of repetitive work. The divine solution is humanity, made from clay, blood, breath, or sacred substance, depending on the tradition being told. Clay is an important image here. It is the same material used for bricks, tablets, vessels, figurines, and seals. It comes from the riverland and accepts pressure from the hand. It can be shaped, dried, broken, remade, and fired into durability. To imagine humans from clay is not childish. It is a profound local truth. You are earth that remembers touch. The worker in the field is clay made upright. The tablet in the archive is clay made articulate. The brick in the temple wall is clay made obedient. Sumer looks at mud and sees possibility, but also control. Everything shaped from clay bears the mark of someone's intention. That may be comforting or frightening, depending on who holds the hand. The stories of humanity's creation also carry an unexpected dignity. Being made for work sounds bleak, but work in Sumer is not meaningless. Labor sustains the city, feeds the gods, preserves order, and keeps chaos from returning. The worker's body is small, yet the task is cosmic. A basket of earth lifted from a canal participates in the survival of the world. This is how societies endure hardship. They surround necessity with meaning. They tell the tired person that the field matters beyond hunger. They tell the canal digger that water belongs inside a sacred arrangement. They tell the brewer, weaver, potter, herder, and scribe that each task stands beneath heaven. Of course, meaning can be merciful. It can also be useful to those in charge. You move toward the edge of the settlement at midday. The heat presses down with a dull palm. Flies gather near animals. The river glitters too brightly to look at for long. In a shaded work area, women grind grain with heavy stones. The motion repeats, forward and back, until time itself seems to be ground into flour. Their labor is quieter than royal inscriptions, but far more constant. Bread, beer, textiles, and childcare hold the civilization together as much as temples and kings. The divine household depends on hidden hands. The city stands because ordinary people repeat exhausting tasks without becoming famous. Nobody carves monuments to sore wrists, yet clay tablets sometimes preserve traces of these lives. Names of workers, categories of labor, allocations of grain, groups of women assigned to textile production, teams of men sent to fields or canals. The records are impersonal, but not empty. Behind each sign is a person who woke, ate, worried, aged, and disappeared. In Sumer's worldview, that disappearance did not end obligation. The dead entered another order, shadowed and grim in many traditions, while the living continued the work. Generations replaced one another like hands passing the same basket. The city remained, at least for a while. The gods continued to be fed. Perhaps the most unsettling part is how familiar it feels. You may not bring barley to a temple storehouse, but your own world also measures labor, tracks time, stores records, assigns value, and asks people to trust systems larger than themselves. The old clay tablets do not feel alien because they are strange. They feel strange because they are close. The afternoon softens. Workers return from the fields with slow steps. Mud dries on their legs. Their shoulders slope with fatigue. Smoke rises from cooking fires again, and the smell of bread moves through the settlement like a small mercy. A child watches the adults come home. He does not know the full theology of creation. He does not understand divine counsels or sacred decrees. He knows warmth, hunger, sleep, and the rough touch of a parent's hand. Yet he is already inside the system. The world has a place prepared for him, and it may not be gentle. Perhaps humans were created for the work. Perhaps that is only how powerful institutions explained the work that already existed. Perhaps the myth preserves both truth and excuse, both reverence and control. In Sumer, those things are rarely cleanly separated. The night approaches, and the canal darkens to a black ribbon. Frogs begin their pulse in the reeds. Somewhere, a final tablet is set aside to dry. Somewhere, a worker lies down with aching muscles, while above him the stars appear like quiet witnesses. And in that silence, the old question remains open. If humanity was made to serve, then what happens when the servant begins to remember? The night opens above the plain with a depth that feels almost mathematical. You stand where the fields have cooled, and the last heat slips from the mud brick walls. The air smells of damp earth, straw, date smoke, and the faint sweetness of beer fermenting somewhere behind a courtyard door. Above you, the stars do not look decorative. They look counted. In Sumer, number is not a dry little tool kept in a corner for merchants and nervous accountants. Number becomes a way of arranging reality. It touches fields, rations, bricks, sheep, labor days, temple offerings, journeys, stars, music, and time itself. The world is not only seen, It is measured. You hear a reed stylus press into clay. A hand makes marks that stand for quantities. Grain becomes a sign. Sheep become signs. Work becomes signs. The vast noise of human effort is reduced into rows, columns, and values. It is practical, certainly. It is also a little unsettling, because once something can be measured, it can be managed. And once it can be managed, it can be demanded. A mainstream historical fact rests quietly here. Sumerian and broader Mesopotamian scribal culture developed sophisticated numerical systems, including the base 60 tradition that still shapes how people divide hours, minutes, and circles. Scholars at universities such as Yale, Stanford, and Oxford often describe Mesopotamian mathematics as one of the great early foundations of scientific and administrative thought. You live inside that inheritance without noticing. 60 seconds, 60 minutes, 360 degrees. A circle divided by an ancient habit of mind, the clock near your bed, the calendar on your wall, and the angle measured by a modern engineer all carry a faint Mesopotamian shadow. That is a strange kind of survival. The number 60 was useful because it could be divided many ways. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30 all fit into it neatly. For people dividing grain, land, labor, and time, this was not mystical nonsense. It was elegant practicality. Ancient accountants, against all odds, had taste. Yet the system also created an atmosphere of hidden order. When numbers fit together so smoothly, they seem to reveal a world built according to pattern. The scribe counting barley and the priest watching the sky may not be doing the same job, but both are hunting regularity. Both are asking what can be predicted. Your mind drifts into a scribal room where boys repeat numerical tables under a teacher's eye. The floor is dusty. The wall is warm. Clay tablets lie on a reed mat like sleeping animals. A student presses a sign too deeply and smears the edge. The teacher notices, because teachers have always possessed this unfortunate gift. The air carries the scent of wet clay, wool, and oil smoke. Outside, a donkey brays with magnificent lack of respect for mathematics. Inside, numbers march in disciplined rows. The students learn not only signs, but habits of thinking. They learn equivalence, conversion, distribution, and abstraction. This is where the secret deepens. A society that can calculate can imagine beyond the visible object. A basket of grain is here. A future harvest is not here. A debt is not here. A scheduled labor crew is not here. Yet all can exist on a tablet as numbers awaiting fulfillment. The unseen becomes administratively real. There is an open, scholarly debate about how theoretical early Mesopotamian mathematics truly was in its earliest stages. Some researchers emphasize its practical roots in accounting, land measurement, and rationing. Others point to later school tablets that show remarkable abstraction, tables, reciprocals, and problem-solving beyond immediate daily need. The evidence suggests a mind moving between marketplace, temple, and pure pattern. That movement matters. People begin by counting things. Then they count possibilities. Eventually, they study relationships between quantities, even when the sheep have politely left the room. A quirky tidbit appears in the school exercises. Some mathematical problems describe fields, bricks, workers, and digging projects with such careful detail that they feel like ancient word problems. Yes, even thousands of years ago, students may have stared at a clay tablet and wondered why anyone cared how fast a canal could be dug. The modern soul feels seen. You step outside again, where the sky has grown darker, the stars sharpen, the moon lifts above the flat land, turning canals into silver cuts across the fields. In this world, the heavens are not silent scenery. They are watched, recorded, feared, and eventually systematized. Sumerian and later Mesopotamian observers paid close attention to celestial patterns. Over many centuries, the peoples of Mesopotamia developed traditions of astronomy and astrology that linked heavenly movements with events on Earth. The earliest Sumerian background is difficult to separate from later Akkadian and Babylonian developments, but the fascination with the sky begins deep in the same cultural soil. The stars offer a different kind of number. They return, they vanish, they rise at certain seasons, they guide planting, ritual, travel, and omen reading. The sky becomes a tablet too, but one written in light, distance, and repetition, Unlike clay, it cannot be held. Unlike a human ruler, it does not need sleep. Imagine a priest or observer standing on a roof at night. The brick beneath his feet is still warm from the day. He watches a bright planet near the horizon. He does not see a cold world in space, as modern science would describe it. He sees a sign, a presence, a movement with meaning. To him, the sky is not empty. The heavens are a vast official record. If only one knows how to read them. A strange birth, an eclipse, an unusual conjunction, a storm, a failing crop, a king's illness. All may be drawn into systems of interpretation. The human world and the celestial world are imagined as connected by pattern, not accident. This is another way Sumer feels as if it knew too much. It sensed, with ancient seriousness, that life is governed by cycles. Rivers rise and fall, crops grow and die, moonlight waxes and fades, kingship moves, cities flourish, then weaken, bodies age, records accumulate, nothing stands alone. Everything belongs to sequence. Perhaps that's why number becomes so powerful. It gives shape to repetition. It allows the mind to hold what the body cannot. You cannot hold a year in your hands. You cannot carry a full season in a basket. Yet you can mark days, divide months, predict festivals, and prepare fields because number turns time into a structure. The calendar is a kind of quiet authority. A farmer may experience the year through heat, mud, insects, hunger, and harvest. A temple official experiences it through offerings, rituals, dues, and stored supplies. A scribe experiences it through dated records. Together, they create an organized year, one where human life follows both nature and institution. You hear the low creak of a door. Someone steps into the courtyard and looks upward. Perhaps he is only cooling himself after work. Perhaps he is wondering whether the moon promises good weather. Perhaps he is thinking of nothing at all, which is a rare and underrated achievement. Still, the sky watches him back. The secret language of numbers does not replace wonder. It sharpens it. To count the stars does not make them less beautiful. To divide the hour does not make the night less deep. Instead, measurement teaches the mind that beauty may have structure and fear may have intervals. In Sumer, the measured world and the sacred world lean toward one another. Numbers serve administration, but they also support ritual time. Calculations distribute grain, but they also help maintain festivals. Lists classify laborers, but they also classify offerings, stars, gods, and signs. The same impulse keeps returning. Name it, count it, place it in order. The danger is quiet. A counted thing may become less mysterious to the administrator, but not less alive to itself. A worker counted in a ration list still feels hunger. A field measured by boundary lines still cracks under drought. A star assigned an omen still burns beyond human interpretation. Systems explain much, but not everything. That may be the hidden humility inside the clay. The Sumerians measured brilliantly, yet their world remained uncertain. Floods still came. Illness still entered homes. Kings still died. Cities still fell. Number gave them tools, not escape. The night grows cooler. The canals reflect the moon. A scribe closes a tablet box. A priest watches a constellation sink lower. A farmer sleeps beside a wall, trusting that morning will return because it always has. Until one day, it does not. You feel the old patterns settle around you, calm and immense. Count the sheep, count the grain, count the days, count the stars, count what can be held and what cannot. Count the world until the world begins to answer in rhythm. And perhaps, beneath that rhythm, Sumer discovers one of civilization's most enduring secrets. Time is not merely passing over human beings. Once measured, it begins passing through them. The sound of counting settles into the deeper hum of storage rooms, courtyards, and guarded doors. You find yourself beside a temple complex at dawn, where the first light touches mud brick walls and turns them the color of warm bread. The city is stirring, but the sacred household has already begun its work. A porter steps through the gate with a sack across his shoulder. Behind him comes another, and another, their bodies moving under the weight of grain. The air smells of barley dust, animal hide, wool grease, and the sour sweetness of beer jars cooling in shadow. Somewhere, a seal is pressed into clay. closing a container with a mark of authority. Nothing here is random. The temple is not only a place of prayer. It is a warehouse, a workplace, an office, a kitchen, a weaving center, a court of obligation, and a theater of divine ownership. The god may be unseen, but the god's property is extremely visible. Fields feed the institution. Herds move under its name. Workers receive rations from its stores. Scribes watch the flow like patient spiders in a web. A mainstream historical fact rests in this quiet machinery. Administrative tablets from cities such as Lagash, Uruk, and Nippur show vast systems of goods and labor, including grain, wool, livestock, silver, land, and human work assignments. Scholars at major universities have long used these records to reconstruct the economic life of Sumerian cities. The records are dry at first glance. They list amounts, names, dates, and offices. Yet when you linger over them, they begin to breathe. Every number suggests movement. Every ration suggests a mouth. Every delivery suggests someone carrying something under heat, rain, or command. The temple economy is sacred, but it is also deeply practical. Grain must not vanish. Wool must be spun. Sheep must be counted. Beer must be brewed. Workers must be fed enough to continue being workers, which is a tidy little moral arrangement if you do not think too hard about it. Naturally, you are thinking too hard about it. You pass into a courtyard where women sit with wool piled beside them. Their fingers move quickly, pulling, twisting, preparing fiber that will become cloth. The work is repetitive, but not simple. Textile production requires skill, time, attention, and discipline. Cloth is warmth, payment, offering, trade good, and status marker. It wraps bodies and carries value. The women talk quietly while they work. A child sleeps near a basket. A supervisor moves along the line with the calm expression of someone who has made interruption into a profession. The smell of wool is thick, almost oily. Dust floats in the morning light. Behind this scene lies an enormous truth. The wealth of Sumer is not only in royal treasures or temple statues. It is in processed grain, woven textiles, managed herds, organized labor, and controlled surplus. Civilization becomes powerful when it can gather more than the day requires, store it, and decide who receives it. Storage is authority in a room. A quirky tidbit hides inside the ration tablets. Some records measure beer allowances for different workers, with quantities that could vary by role, status, or task. So yes, in a certain sense, ancient administration knew how to place people on a beer plan. It sounds festive until you remember that the plan came with heavy labor and supervision. The temple's distribution system can look generous from one angle. It feeds workers, supports specialists, funds rituals, and sustains large projects. From another angle, it looks controlling. It draws people into dependence, assigns them categories, and makes access to food part of institutional power. Both views may be true. That is the discomfort. Your feet carry you toward a room lined with jars. Some are sealed, some are open. Clay tags identify contents. The space feels cool and close. A scribe kneels near a tablet, his stylus moving with small, decisive motions. He is not composing a hymn. He is recording quantities. Yet his work may matter just as much to the city's survival as any song to heaven. The temple cannot function on reverence alone. It needs inventory. There is an open scholarly debate over whether the term temple economy makes early Sumerian life seem too centralized. Some historians stress the enormous role of temple institutions in production and redistribution. Others emphasize private households, local elites, merchants, and palace power, arguing that the economy was more varied than older models suggested. The debate is important because it changes the human picture. If the temple controls nearly everything, the city seems like a sacred machine. If households and merchants have more room, the city becomes a landscape of negotiation, rivalry, and improvisation. The tablets offer evidence for both control and complexity. You stand at the boundary between those possibilities. On one side, the temple courtyard arranges goods under divine authority. On the other, market activity, household production, and personal exchange continue in the lanes beyond. The city is not a single heartbeat. It is many rhythms, some official, some private, some hidden from every tablet. A man brings silver by weight, not coin. It shines softly in the dim light, broken into pieces that can be measured. Silver serves as a standard of value in many transactions, though barley remains essential in daily distribution. Value here is not one thing. It is grain in a jar, wool on a loom, labor in a body, silver on a scale, and favor in a temple. The scale matters. Weights must be trusted. Measures must be recognized. Seals must mean something. Without shared standards, exchange becomes argument. With shared standards, exchange becomes order, and order becomes something powerful people can defend with impressive seriousness. A small cylinder seal lies on a table. It is carved with tiny figures, almost impossibly fine. When rolled across wet clay, it leaves a continuous scene. Animals, heroes, worshippers, symbols, and divine signs move across the surface. The seal is beautiful, but it is also security. Art and administration shake hands, politely and firmly. You touch nothing. You only watch. The seal tells the container. This has been closed by authority. The tablet tells the future. This was delivered. The storeroom tells the worker. The system remembers what is owed. Each object participates in trust. Though trust here is not sentimental, it is enforced by marks, offices, reputation, and fear. Outside, a line forms near a distribution point. People wait with baskets and jars. Some look tired, some look bored. One person mutters something that probably would not be wise to write down. A child chases a beetle through dust until called back sharply. Life continues inside the machinery. This is where Sumer feels most modern in a slightly unwelcome way. The city knows how to turn life into records, and records into obligations. It knows that a society can be held together by belief, but also by logistics. It knows that sacred power becomes durable when it controls food. Perhaps that is the hidden structure beneath the divine language. A god owns the field, but men administer it. A goddess receives cloth, but women weave it. A temple feeds workers, but only after workers have fed the temple. The circle is elegant and not entirely innocent. The afternoon grows hot. Grain dust clings to skin. In the courtyard, a worker lifts a jar and exhales heavily. The scribe does not look up. His hand continues its small, exact movement, pressing signs into clay that will outlast the sweat of the person being recorded. There is something almost ghostly in that imbalance. The labor passes through bodies and disappears. The record remains. The worker's back aches, heals, aches again, and is gone. The tablet sits in a storeroom, survives a fire, breaks into pieces, and waits thousands of years for a scholar to read its quiet accounting. Yet the records do not erase the people completely. They leave shadows, a name beside a ration, a group assigned to a task, a delivery of wool, a deficit noted with concern, a payment measured in barley. These are not biographies, but they are traces of existence pressed into clay by necessity. As evening approaches, the temple complex softens under amber light. The gate darkens. The last deliveries are checked. The jars are sealed. The workers drift into lanes where cooking smoke rises and voices lower. Above the roofs, the sacred building holds its place against the sky. You begin to understand the temple economy not as one simple system, but as a living arrangement of devotion, hunger, labor, trust, and control. It is beautiful in its order and troubling in its demands. It feeds the city and binds it. It raises offerings to heaven and pulls human lives into schedules. The god may sit unseen in the inner room, but the god's account books are very real, and perhaps that is the quiet truth beneath the stored grain. Civilization does not become powerful only when it dreams. It becomes powerful when it can make everyone bring the harvest to the same door. Rain is not falling, yet the ground beneath your imagination is wet. You stand on a low mound where ancient houses have collapsed into layers, one settlement resting upon another like memories pressed under sleep. The air is still, but the silence feels waterlogged, as if the earth has not forgotten the weight of flood. A trench opens beside you. Its sides show bands of occupation: ash, pottery, brick, refuse, and clean silt. That clean layer is the one that holds the eye. It interrupts human life like a blank line in a story. Below it, people lived. Above it, people returned. Between them, something covered everything. This is where archaeology and myth begin to look at one another. Sumerian tradition remembers a great flood that divides the age of impossible kings from the more familiar world of later rulers. Excavations at several Mesopotamian sites have revealed ancient flood deposits. though they do not all date to the same event. Scholars from institutions such as the University of Pennsylvania, Oxford, and Chicago have studied these layers with caution, because mud can be honest and confusing at the same time. A mainstream historical fact is important here. Flooding was a real and repeated danger in southern Mesopotamia, where rivers, canals, storms, and low terrain made water both life-giver and destroyer. Archaeological flood deposits at sites such as Ur and Kish and Shuruppak show that some communities experienced severe local inundations in antiquity. Local is not a small word. A local flood can destroy your whole world if your whole world is a city, a field, a family, and a storehouse. Modern people sometimes dismiss ancient flood stories because no single global event fits every tale neatly. But ancient memory does not require a planet to drown before grief becomes cosmic. One drowned city is enough for those who loved it. You walk down into the trench. The wall is close enough to touch. The smell is dry now, but you imagine the older stench of saturated wood, dead animals, spoiled grain, broken plaster, and stagnant water. It is not a dramatic smell. It is worse than dramatic. It is practical, intimate, and inescapable. A flood enters homes without permission. It lifts baskets. It ruins bread. It softens bricks. It carries away tools, animals, sleeping mats, boundary markers, and the little objects that make a place feel human. It erases walls from below, turning architecture back into mud. In a land where homes are made from earth, water is not only a force, it is an undoing. A quirky tidbit sits in the famous excavations at Ur. When early excavators found a thick flood layer, some eagerly connected it with the Great Flood of Mesopotamian tradition. Later, scholarship became more careful, noting that different flood layers appear at different sites and periods. Even archaeology can have a dramatic phase before calming down. That human eagerness is understandable. A clean band of silt looks like proof. It looks like the story opening its mouth. Yet the ground rarely speaks in complete sentences. It gives samples, dates, textures, and interruptions. The scholar must resist the temptation to make one layer carry every ancient memory. Still, the connection cannot be ignored. Mesopotamian flood stories are not floating fantasies detached from the land. They come from a place where water could transform the world overnight. They come from people who built beside rivers, depended on rivers, feared rivers, and watched river mud preserve and destroy with the same patient face. Your mind drifts toward Shuruppak, one of the cities tied to flood tradition. Evening gathers over its imagined streets. The walls are low and sun-baked. Grain jars stand inside houses. Children run along packed lanes. A man checks a roof beam. A woman covers a pot. The river beyond the settlement moves quietly, giving no explanation of its future behavior. Then the story changes. In later versions of the flood tradition, a chosen man receives warning and survives by building a great boat. The details shift across Sumerian and Akkadian compositions, but the mood remains. The gods decide destruction. One divine power preserves a remnant. Animals, family, craft, and memory are carried through water. Human life continues, but never innocently. There is an open scholarly debate over how to understand the relationship between the Sumerian flood tradition and later flood stories across the ancient Near East. Some researchers emphasize literary borrowing and adaptation. Others focus on shared environmental memories, repeated river disasters, and the power of flood symbolism in agrarian societies. The evidence suggests a long conversation, not a single simple source. The flood story becomes a vessel itself. It carries fear from one language to another, from one city to another, from one age to another. Each culture reshapes it, but the central image remains stubbornly alive. Water rises. Humanity trembles. A survivor preserves continuity. Why does that image endure? Perhaps because flood is creation reversed. In many ancient imaginations, the ordered world emerges from waters, or is surrounded by them. To be flooded is to return toward the formless. Fields lose their boundaries. Roads vanish. Houses dissolve. The city forgets its shape. Water makes every human arrangement look temporary. That is a very rude lesson from nature. You stand on the mound after the flood has passed. The air is hot, and everything smells of rot and drying clay. People move slowly through wreckage. They search for tools, relatives, grain, animals, anything that can be saved. A wall leans at an impossible angle. A storage jar lies broken. its contents swollen and useless. No one needs philosophy in that moment, yet philosophy will come later. So will ritual. So will story. Human beings suffer first, then explain. The explanation does not remove the pain, but it gives the pain a place to live. A priest may say, the gods were angry. A survivor may say the river rose beyond memory. A ruler may rebuild and claim divine favor. A scribe may record the event in a form that turns disaster into tradition. Slowly, mud becomes theology. This is the hidden movement of flood memory. Real catastrophe enters communal imagination. It expands. It gathers moral meaning. It becomes a warning about divine order, human noise, royal duty, fragile cities, and the mercy that allows a remnant to survive. The event may shrink in scientific terms, while growing in symbolic power. That does not make it false. It makes it human. You look again at the silt layer. It is pale, quiet, and almost beautiful. There are no screams in it now, no rushing water, no hands gripping door frames, only a band of earth between older floor and newer floor. Yet that band once meant interruption. It meant fear, hunger, mourning, repair, and the decision to return. Returning may be the most astonishing part. People did not simply flee forever from every flooded place. They rebuilt on mounds. They raised floors. They repaired canals. They trusted the same rivers again because they had no easy choice. Civilization in Sumer is not the absence of disaster. It is the repeated decision to build after disaster. The city becomes a negotiation with memory. A higher platform says, the water came here. A new wall says, we have not surrendered. A ritual offering says, may the powers be kinder. A tablet says, this happened. Or perhaps, this must be remembered differently. You hear distant thunder, though the sky above you remains clear. It is only imagination, or perhaps the old landscape speaking through habit. The reeds tremble at the edge of the canal. Birds lift suddenly from the marsh. The people of the plain look upward, then toward the water, always watching. Flood memory does not end when the mud dries. It settles into stories of kingship, divine anger, survival, and time divided into before and after. It teaches that the world can be washed clean, but not gently. It teaches that knowledge may survive only if someone carries it through chaos. Perhaps that is why Sumer's flood tradition feels so heavy. It is not only about death, it is about continuity under threat. It asks what must be saved when everything familiar dissolves. Grain, animals, family, craft, language, ritual, names, the pattern of civilization itself. Night settles over the mound. The trench darkens. The clean silt band fades into shadow. But you still know it is there. Beneath your feet lie broken floors, repaired walls, forgotten hearths, and the mute evidence of water's old authority. And perhaps the flood was never one event alone. Perhaps it was a memory repeated until it became sacred, a warning written in mud, a reminder that every city stands only as long as the waters agree to stay where humans have placed them. The mound grows quiet under a sky pale with moonlight, and your attention turns toward figures standing behind the oldest stories. They are not kings exactly. They are not ordinary priests either. They arrive in tradition, like shapes glimpsed through river mist, carrying knowledge from a time that feels deliberately unreachable. They are culture bringers. In Mesopotamian memory, wisdom does not always rise slowly from human trial and error. Sometimes it appears as a gift, a descent, an instruction sent from beyond ordinary life. The first cities are taught. The first arts are handed down. The first patterns of civilized existence are not invented so much as received, guarded, and imperfectly remembered. That idea changes the atmosphere. You stand in an imagined dawn near Eridu, where the marshes spread outward in silver channels. The temple precinct is still dim. Reeds whisper in a light wind. Fish break the surface of the water, leaving rings that widen and vanish. The smell is brackish green and ancient, as if the sea itself has crept inland to listen. Eridu held a special place in southern Mesopotamian tradition as a city of great antiquity, associated with wisdom, water, and the god Enki. Archaeology confirms that Eridu was occupied very early, with a long sequence of temple rebuilding. Scholars at Oxford, Chicago, and other major research centers treated as one of the key sites for understanding early sacred architecture and urban memory. The tradition makes Eridu feel older than ordinary time. It is imagined as a place where knowledge entered the human world. Not loud knowledge, not the sharp, glittering kind that announces itself in victory inscriptions. This is deeper, stranger knowledge, how to build, measure, purify, govern, write, sing, farm, judge, and survive. In later Mesopotamian writings, the Apkallu appear as ancient sages linked with the world before the flood. They are often described as wise beings, sometimes associated with fish like imagery, ritual knowledge, and the transmission of civilization. They stand in the background of kings and temples, like teachers whose faces have become half mythical. The mainstream fact is careful, but fascinating. The Apkallu are best known from later Mesopotamian traditions, especially first millennium texts and iconography, rather than early Sumerian documents in a simple, direct form. Yet they preserve older ideas about primeval wisdom, divine instruction, and the fragile chain connecting humanity with sacred knowledge. That chain matters. A quirky tidbit swims up from the deep. Some ancient descriptions and later artistic traditions connect these sages with fish cloaks or fish-like forms. Naturally, modern fringe theories have had an absolute feast with this detail, imagining visitors from the sea, the stars, or both. Mainstream historians see ritual symbolism, divine association, and mythic costume, not lost astronauts with questionable fashion sense. Still, the image is unforgettable. A being from the waters approaches the edge of the human world. It carries the arts of civilization. It teaches what humans could not yet know. Then it withdraws, leaving behind cities that must remember lessons they did not fully earn. You hear the reeds move again? Water is the right place for such figures. In Mesopotamian thought, deep waters are not merely wet spaces. They are sources of wisdom, mystery, and power. Fresh water wells up from beneath the earth. Rivers feed fields. Marshes hide life. The sea lies beyond familiar control. To imagine wisdom emerging from water is to imagine knowledge rising from the hidden foundation of the world. Enki, lord of wisdom and sweet waters, belongs to this atmosphere. He is clever, generous, dangerous, and difficult to reduce. He knows secrets. He helps humanity in stories where other divine powers may be harsher. He is linked with crafts, creation, purification, and the subtle intelligence that keeps systems from collapsing entirely. A divine trickster. Perhaps a cosmic technician. Perhaps. Or simply the god you want nearby when the official plan becomes dreadful. There is an open scholarly debate over how to interpret these primeval sage traditions. Some researchers view them as priestly attempts to place ritual knowledge in a sacred ancestry older than kingship. Others see them as mythic explanations for the sudden complexity of early civilization, shaped by memory, theology, and the prestige of learned specialists. The debate lingers because the stories are doing several things at once. They exalt knowledge. They protect professional authority. They explain origins. They place scribes, priests, exorcists, and scholars inside a lineage that begins before ordinary history. If your ritual formula comes from an antediluvian sage, it is harder for your neighbor to call it nonsense. Very convenient. Again, your mind drifts into a scholar's chamber in a later Mesopotamian city. The room is small, lined with tablets. The air smells of dust, cedar oil, and old clay. A learned man copies an incantation. He does not think of himself as inventing sacred knowledge. He thinks he is preserving it, restoring it, receiving it from a chain of teachers stretching back into a half-remembered beginning. That attitude is important. Ancient knowledge is often valued not because it is new, but because it is old. A teaching becomes powerful when it can be traced backward, beyond fathers, beyond cities, beyond the flood, toward the first ordering of the world. Innovation may happen, but it prefers to wear the clothing of inheritance. The ones who came before are therefore not merely characters. They are a claim about knowledge itself. True knowledge has ancestry. It arrives from a source deeper than ordinary opinion. It must be copied carefully, performed correctly, and guarded from forgetfulness. You feel how this idea could shape a civilization. A scribe does not simply learn signs. He enters a tradition that may imagine itself as older than kings. A priest does not merely perform ritual. He repeats gestures believed to reach back toward the first pattern. A ruler does not merely command. He must be advised by those who claim access to ancient order. Knowledge becomes sacred because it remembers. Yet this memory is not clear. It is clouded, layered, and politically useful. That makes it more haunting, not less. The stories of sages before the flood suggest that civilization did not begin cleanly. It began with instruction from powers or ancestors standing outside normal human life. It began with a gift that might also be a burden, because to receive knowledge is to become responsible for it. You stand again by the water at Eridu. The marsh glows under moonlight. Insects tremble in the air. A boat rests against the bank, its bitumen dark and glossy. The temple rises beyond, rebuilt generation after generation on its sacred mound. Each layer says that something important was believed to have happened here. No sage appears. No fish-cloaked teacher steps from the canal. Only the water moves, slow and black, reflecting stars that seem older than the ground. Yet the absence is part of the spell. Traditions often preserve not the figure itself, but the space where the figure should have been. Perhaps the ancient sages are memories of real learned specialists, later magnified into myth. Perhaps they preserve the awe felt by villagers watching temple experts command writing, ritual, medicine, and astronomy. Perhaps they are poetic symbols of the way civilization seemed to arrive from a hidden realm, too complex to credit entirely to ordinary hands. It is possible that all these explanations are true at different depths. The story of the ones who came before does not need to prove a literal visitor to disturb you. It is enough that Sumer and its heirs imagined knowledge as older than themselves. It is enough that they believed civilization had been handed down, not merely assembled. It is enough that the first teachers were placed beyond the flood, where memory becomes sacred and unreachable. The waters darken. The temple wall holds the last faint light. Somewhere, a scribe stores a tablet that claims an ancient authority for what it preserves. Somewhere, a priest speaks words he believes were not born in his own mouth, and perhaps the true unease is this. Every civilization lives by knowledge it did not create alone. It inherits tools, signs, rituals, warnings, and systems from people it can no longer thank. Sumer gave that inheritance a face, then set the face behind water, behind myth, behind the broken horizon of the flood. The moonlight thins, and a different kind of power enters the plain. You feel it first, as movement on roads, as hoofbeats near city gates, as the rough voice of soldiers calling across dawn air. The Sumerian world does not vanish in one clean moment. It is gathered, challenged, absorbed, and spoken through new mouths. Knowledge passes into empire. The old cities remain visible, their temples still rising from their sacred platforms. Yet the balance of power shifts toward rulers who dream beyond one city's fields. The landscape widens. Armies march farther. Royal names stretch across regions. Messengers travel with tablets sealed against tampering. The world of local city gods and temple accounts begins to serve larger ambitions. You stand near a gate as dust rises on the horizon. A caravan approaches with donkeys, guards, cloth bundles, and jars tied with rope. A scribe checks a seal impression. A soldier watches everyone with the timeless expression of a man paid to distrust strangers. The air smells of leather, sweat, sun-warmed clay, and dried reeds. Sumerian culture does not disappear when new political powers rise. That is the essential fact. The Akkadian Empire, associated with Sargon of Akkad and his successors in the 3rd millennium BC, united many Mesopotamian cities under a wider imperial structure. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have long studied this period as a turning point in kingship, administration, and cultural exchange. Akkadian is a Semitic language, different from Sumerian. Yet Sumerian remains prestigious in scribal learning, religious literature, and scholarship for centuries. The old tongue becomes something more than ordinary speech. It becomes learned, sacred, traditional, and difficult, which is exactly the sort of thing schools enjoy preserving for students to suffer through respectfully. There is your gentle academic cruelty. In a scribal house, a pupil copies Sumerian signs while speaking a different language at home. The room is warm and severe. Clay tablets lean against a wall. The teacher recites forms, lists, hymns, and ancient phrases. The student repeats them, because the past must be memorized before it can be inherited. This is how Sumer continues, not as a single political body, not as a permanent kingdom, but as a deep cultural engine. Its gods are translated, renamed, merged, and reimagined. Its stories are copied into new dialects and languages. Its signs are adapted. Its school traditions survive inside the very empires that overtake its cities. The conqueror becomes a student. A quirky tidbit sits among the royal legends. Sargon of Akkad later became the subject of birth stories that made him seem almost mythic, including the image of an infant set in a basket and placed upon a river. Whether historical or legendary, the motif is striking, and ancient rulers clearly understood the value of a dramatic origin story. Public relations was not invented yesterday. Imperial power needs memory, and memory needs shape. A ruler who controls cities also wants to control how conquest is remembered. Inscriptions praise victories. Statues display authority. Seals carry official identity. Roads and messengers pull distant places into one political rhythm. The empire does not merely take grain and labor. It takes narrative. Still, Sumerian tradition remains stubborn. The empire may command the land, but it cannot simply erase the old sacred centers. Nippur, especially, holds immense religious importance as the city of Enlil. A ruler who wants legitimacy must respect the places where divine authority is believed to gather. Power must kneel, or at least perform kneeling convincingly. You enter an imagined temple court at Nippur. The wind carries dust across paving stones. Priests move in pale garments. Offerings wait in containers. A royal envoy arrives with gifts, inscriptions, and carefully chosen words. He represents a king whose armies may be feared, yet even he approaches the god's house with measured restraint. The scene reveals a deeper pattern. Empire does not abolish sacred tradition. It recruits it. The ruler needs the old gods to bless new power. The scribes need old texts to train new officials. The people need familiar rituals to survive unfamiliar politics. So Sumer becomes a language of legitimacy. There is an open scholarly debate about the depth of Akkadian control over local Sumerian institutions. Some historians emphasize imperial centralization, military force, and administrative innovation. Others stress regional variation, local continuity, and the resilience of city traditions under wider rule. The evidence suggests both domination and negotiation. That mixture feels realistic. Empires usually look smoother from their own inscriptions than from the ground. A royal text announces unity. A local tablet reveals late deliveries, disputed fields, and officials trying to make instructions work among actual humans. History, inconveniently, keeps its receipts. You walk through a storeroom where tablets from different systems lie close together. Some speak in Sumerian, some in Akkadian. Some preserve older forms beside newer habits. The clay does not care about ethnicity or imperial ideology. It simply holds whatever signs were pressed into it while damp, yet those signs carry a transformation. Sumer's inventions become portable. Writing moves across languages. Gods travel under different names. Flood stories, king traditions, hymns, lamentations, legal formulas, and school exercises pass through generations of scribes. The civilization that began in mud becomes a library for others. Later, Babylonian culture inherits this world deeply. Babylonian scribes study Sumerian as a classical language. They copy old myths, build lexical lists, preserve bilingual texts, and treat ancient compositions as sources of authority. The dead language becomes alive in classrooms, temples, and scholarly archives. There is something almost tender in that. A spoken voice may fade from ordinary streets, yet remain powerful in ritual and learning. It becomes like incense in an old room, no longer the daily air, but still capable of filling the senses when burned. Sumerian survives as remembered speech. The stories change as they travel. Inanna becomes associated with Ishtar, Enki with Ea. The flood survivor receives new names and new compositions. Ancient cities are placed within broader mythic geographies. Creation traditions are adjusted to later theology. Nothing is preserved without alteration. Copying is never perfectly innocent, but alteration is not destruction. It is how tradition breathes. You can feel this in the movement from Sumerian city life into Akkadian and Babylonian imagination. A myth copied by a later scribe is not a fossil. It is a living object used for teaching, ritual, politics, identity, and wonder. The old text becomes new each time a hand presses it again into clay. A young scholar in Babylon studies a Sumerian hymn whose original world is already remote. He may not know the streets where the first singers walked, He may never see the southern marshes at dawn, yet he learns the signs, repeats the lines, and enters a chain of transmission that reaches back through centuries of smoke, mud, and authority. The room is quiet except for stylus marks. The scent of clay and lamp oil fills the air. Outside, a greater city lives under different rulers and different gods, or perhaps the same gods wearing new names. Inside, the old civilization continues in the patience of copying. This is not immortality in a heroic sense. It is messier and more fragile. Tablets break, languages shift, libraries burn, conquerors boast, students make errors, teachers correct them. The past survives not because it is invincible, but because enough people find it useful, sacred, beautiful, or dangerous to forget. Sumer's knowledge passes into empire because empire needs old knowledge. Administration needs writing. Kings need ancient models. Priests need rites. Scholars need lists. Cities need stories about why they matter. Even conquest must dress itself in inherited symbols if it wants to feel permanent. The sun rises over the plain again, and the imperial road glows with dust. A messenger carries a sealed tablet from one authority to another. He may not understand the full history inside the signs. He only knows the tablet must arrive. Yet in his hand, unknowingly, travels the inheritance of cities older than the empire that employs him. Perhaps this is the quiet victory of Sumer. It is conquered, translated, adapted, and outlived. Still, it remains inside the structures that follow. Its signs teach other hands. Its gods speak with other names. Its flood memory rises in other texts. Its mathematics, schools, and sacred habits continue beneath changing crowns. And perhaps every empire, no matter how loud, carries a whisper from those it has absorbed. The conqueror may seize the city, but the city enters the conqueror's mind. In that exchange, the vanished world does not simply end. It changes shape and waits. The dust settles again over the southern plain, and the world becomes almost still. You stand among broken walls where the city has lost its voice, though not its presence. The bricks have softened at their edges. The streets have collapsed into ridges. The Temple Mound rises like a memory that has forgotten how to explain itself. Wind moves across the ruins with a dry, patient sound. This is not an ending in the simple sense. Civilizations do not vanish as neatly as stories prefer. They fade unevenly. They are conquered, copied, abandoned, remembered, misunderstood, translated, and displayed behind museum glass. Their people die, but their systems survive inside other systems. Their gods lose worshippers, but keep names. Their words fall silent, then wait for strangers to read them. Sumer feels unfinished because so much of it remains present. A mainstream historical fact rests beneath this final stillness. Thousands of Sumerian and Mesopotamian tablets survive in museums and collections across the world, while many more remain unpublished, fragmentary, or buried. Scholars from institutions such as Yale, Oxford, Chicago, and Pennsylvania continue to study language, law, religion, economy, and daily life through these clay archives. The civilization is gone, yet its paperwork is still active. That is almost funny. In a tired, ancient way, empires collapse, temples fall, kings become footnotes. But the administrative tablet about barley rations survives and makes modern scholars lean closer, under careful light. Somewhere, a long, dead official is still making people check his numbers. You walk through an imagined museum storeroom at night. The air is cool and controlled. Drawers hold tablets arranged by site, period, language, or acquisition history. Each object is small enough to carry, yet heavy with years. Some are smooth and complete, others are broken at the corners, burned, chipped, or rubbed by old handling. The room smells faintly of dust, cardboard, wood, and time. A curator opens a tray. There lies a tablet written by a hand that moved before most known empires existed. The signs are quiet. They do not glow. They do not announce secrets in golden light. They require patience, training, and humility. The past, rather inconveniently, refuses to behave like a treasure chest with a simple lid, yet every tablet is a surviving act of attention. Someone cared enough to mark a delivery, preserve a hymn, list a star omen, teach a student, record a dispute, praise a deity, or lament a destroyed city. The clay remembers not because it loves humans, but because humans pressed themselves into it. That is why Sumer still watches us, not with eyes, of course. It watches through patterns we have inherited. Cities still gather strangers into shared systems. Writing still turns memory into authority. Numbers still divide time. Officials still demand records. Workers still trade hours for rations, wages, access, and survival. The gods have changed, but the structures remain strangely familiar. A quirky tidbit rises from the archives. Some tablets preserve complaints, proverbs, and school exercises that make ancient people sound startlingly modern. There are grumpy remarks, awkward student copies, and practical frustrations. 5,000 years vanish for a moment, and someone in clay appears to be having a bad day. That little closeness is powerful. It prevents Sumer from becoming only grand and remote. The civilization that imagined divine councils also worried about deliveries. The people who told stories of the flood also trained scribes, brewed beer, raised children, argued over land, and endured the daily insult of being human. The mystery is not that they were unlike us. The mystery is that they were so early and still so recognizable. There is an open scholarly debate over how we should describe Sumer's place in world history. Some historians emphasize its extraordinary innovations, including cities, writing, administration, literature, and complex institutions. Others warn against calling it the first civilization too simply, because other regions developed complexity in different ways, and contact across ancient landscapes was constant. That caution is wise. History is not a race with one winner holding a clay trophy. Still, Sumer remains one of humanity's earliest great experiments in urban life. It gives you a rare view of civilization becoming conscious of itself, not through philosophy first, but through accounts, rituals, fields, schools, temples, and myths. You stand again beneath the night sky over the plain. The rivers are somewhere beyond the dark, sliding through channels that have changed many times. The stars look cold, but steady. A fox moves between ruined walls. The moon catches the pale face of an exposed brick, then leaves it behind. The old cities sleep in layers. Uruk, or Eridu, Nippur, Lagash, Shurupak, and many others become names, then mounds, then excavation reports, then museum labels, then quiet images in the mind. Each name carries a different kind of weight. A city is not only buildings, it is the sum of meals eaten, doors opened, children born, debts owed, hymns sung, and fears endured. Most of that is gone. Still, the clay remains. Perhaps Sumer knew too much, because it discovered the burden of continuity. It learned that memory could survive the body. It learned that authority could be written. It learned that labor could be organized beyond kinship. It learned that gods could inhabit institutions, and institutions could speak with divine confidence. It learned that cities could become worlds, and it learned, surely, that worlds can fail. Salt gathered in fields. Rivers shifted. Rival cities fought. Empires rose. Languages changed. Temples were rebuilt, then neglected. Archives were scattered, burned, buried, and forgotten. The system that seemed so durable was still made from mud, hunger, belief, and human agreement. Those materials are strong, but never permanent. Your mind drifts toward a final tablet lying beneath the ground. It may contain a list of sheep. It may contain a hymn. It may contain a legal decision, a student exercise, a loan, a prayer, or a broken phrase no one can restore. It waits in darkness, pressed between soil and time. No one knows its exact words yet. That uncertainty is part of the spell. Sumer is not finished because the archive is not finished. Every unread tablet may change a detail. Every fragment may add a name. Every seal impression may reveal a forgotten office, a forgotten woman, a forgotten journey of grain, wool, silver, or hope. The truth about Sumer was not hidden in one secret chamber. It was hidden in ordinary abundance. Too many tablets, too many broken signs, too many lives reduced to traces. The hidden truth is not a single answer, but a slow return of voices once believed lost. You listen to the wind over the ruins. It moves through cracks where doors once stood. It carries dust across the place where a scribe may have walked home at dusk, tired and proud, unaware that his clay would outlive his city. He did not write for you. Yet somehow, across the immense dark, you receive him. Perhaps that is enough. The ancient plain grows softer now. The temple mound becomes a shadow. The rivers breathe beyond sight. The tablets sleep in earth, drawers, storerooms, and unread catalogs. Sumer remains near, not as a vanished miracle, but as a warning and a mirror. It tells you that civilization is memory made heavy. It tells you that every system requires belief. It tells you that the first cities were already asking the questions still moving through your own world. Who records? Who works? Who commands? Who remembers? Who is forgotten? No answer rises from the ruins. Only the quiet remains, wide and ancient, with clay beneath it and stars above it. And perhaps the story is not yet complete. Now let the lamps grow dim. Let the old cities sink gently back into their mounds, where broken walls rest under a blanket of dust. Let the canals darken into silver lines, and let the reeds fold their whispers into the night air. The scribes put down their styluses. The workers set aside their baskets. The doors of the storehouses close softly, one by one. You do not need to solve the tablets tonight. You only need to let them be small, patient things, sleeping in the hands of time. The kings with impossible reigns drift away. The gods return to their high rooms and hidden waters. The flood becomes only a memory of rain beyond the horizon. The numbers on the clay loosen their grip on the hour. Breathe slowly. Somewhere in the dark, a river keeps moving. It carries silt, moonlight, and the faint reflection of stars that watched the first cities rise. It does not hurry. It does not explain. It simply passes through the plain, as it has done for ages beyond counting. And you may rest now beside that ancient water. The world outside your room is far from Sumer, yet something quiet has crossed the distance. A mark pressed into clay, a name nearly lost, a question without an answer. They fade together, not into fear, but into softness. Let the ruins become hills. Let the hills become shadows. Let the shadows become sleep. The story remains unfinished, but it does not need to trouble you now. It can wait beneath the dust, calm and patient, until another night.